Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the New Marketing Podcast. Kyle Golding, Pritch Pritchard. Today, we're going to talk about the beginning of the end of 2019. Welcome to the Golding Group Neo Marketing Podcast, a bi-weekly discussion of modern business communication. Morning, Pritch. How are you?
I'm doing great, Kyle. How about yourself?
Fantastic. It's the first week of December, which means it's the beginning of the last month of the last quarter of 2019, or the beginning of the end of 2019.
Nice. I like it.
Do you know why I bring this up today? Why is that important?
Well, I suspect you've got some tips that will help us to go back in time and pick up some things that we talked about before, plus a couple of extra things I know you've got up your sleeve.
This is true. First of all, you need to have your 2020 plan in place right now. And if you don't, kind of in trouble.
Yep.
So, but don't panic. We're going to help you figure that out, work on it. One of the reasons a lot of people don't get into, a couple of reasons. I'm going to give you a couple of reasons why people don't get into long-term planning soon enough. Number one, they think they're intimidated by the process, or they think it's expensive. I'm going to dispel a little bit that today, explain that. Number two, they feel like the more structure they create, the more confined that they'll be. And entrepreneurs are the worst about this. People who run businesses are very happy with structure because it makes it easy to show up every day and kind of meet expectations. Entrepreneurs are really terrible about, I want to do whatever I want to do, and I don't want to be held down by too many rules. That's why they're entrepreneurs and not working for someone else on the job, right?
I want to do the fun stuff, not the hard stuff.
And I'm going to explain that the more structure you have, the more ability you have to do what you want to do.
Yeah.
So
perfect. Take it away, maestro.
So here's the number one takeaway for you. Business success comes from balance.
All right.
There are a lot of things.
We haven't talked about balance.
There's a lot of things in business that seem like they're sort of opposite of each other, or oxymorons. Move slow to move fast, and think big, act small, etc.
Right.
And I'm going to go over a couple of topics today specific into strategic planning that seem like they're opposites of each other, and I'll explain why they work in concert together. First one being, I mentioned that a lot of people don't make long-term plans and strategic plans for the next year because they're afraid that structure will hold them back.
Right.
But at the end of the day, planning and structure creates your ability to be adaptable. Listen carefully, folks. A structured plan allows you to be adaptable. Now, how does that happen? Well, first of all, and the second piece that goes in correlation with this that I mentioned earlier is people don't know where to start. They're intimidated by the process, right? So number one, every strategic plan, every long-term plan starts with rough draft. It starts with ideas. It starts with brainstorming, right? Throw it all out there and see what happens.
Get it on the paper.
That's right. So it's going to go through multiple phases, multiple iterations. You don't have to have a perfect first time. The key is to just start.
Right.
Well, what's the easiest place to start? With a calendar.
There you go.
We're all tied to it. The IRS is definitely tied to it.
You bet.
And so thinking about yearly budgets and planning and income, expenses, and then of course, and ultimately your taxes and all of your balance for the end of the year, whether it's calendar year or fiscal year, comes from the calendar. So a calendar itself is a great place to start with how to just get started. Right. So every business has seasonal ups and downs, ebbs and flows. You have your busy time, your not busy time. You have natural, obviously if you make products that are tied to a season, tied to holidays, et cetera, like that, if you're a CPA, that first quarter is where it's at, third quarter not so much, et cetera, right? So natural ebbs and flows, natural process of seasonal business. That's number one. Now, many businesses aren't seasonal, but you have natural breaks. You have different weather in the winter, which it causes different issues than in the summer. In the heat of the summer, you have kids out of school in the summer. You have a lot more vacation time planned then, back to school times. Even the state fair in your town can affect businesses. Because people are spending their money differently. They're paying attention to things differently, et cetera. So
they're not coming to your store. They're going to the fair.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
So there's lots. And then, of course, holidays. There's just things are closed. You can't get things in the mail. Banks aren't open, et cetera, on holidays, et cetera. There's a lot of things, whether you're selling something that's a holiday item or not. Holidays affect how you do business.
Absolutely. Tragically, there are not enough of those days where things are closed anymore.
Well, it's less and less, yes.
It still affects you.
Right. So the calendar is a great place to start with places you know that will be easier to do business or will be more successful, and places that you will be lacking business or might be harder to do business.
Yep.
So that's number one, is starting with, then create just get the calendar out and start that rough draft of plotting in, this is good, this is bad, we got to look out for this, we got to prepare for this, and then working back for how do we save money or build up inventory for those times when we need it, how do we allow people to stagger vacations, etc., so that we're not all gone at once. The times that we know we're going to be closed for bank holidays or whatever, how do we make sure that we come through and that we're prepared for it? That's a great starting place. And
that's not too tough.
No. And if you have good historical records too, you have good ideas about your sales, trends, etc., and planning around them so that you don't get caught either too high or too low. So that's a great place to start with that. The other thing about a calendar is you can set deadlines on calendars.
Yeah, buddy.
And I mentioned this is the end of the fourth quarter, right? Quarters are a great place to start. So you have goals for the year. You have goals for the business forever, right? The type of business you want to be and your philosophy and your big overarching how you're going to be. But you have to break that down somehow. So the easiest way is 5-year plans, 2-year plans, then get into 1-year planning. 1-year planning is very actionable. It's very something that can be measured, and you can look at it and go, we're in the 1-year plan and we're either doing well or we're lagging behind. Then you break that down into half year, into quarters, and then from the quarters into months, and then you get down into weeks, and then you get down daily, right? Looking at your sales numbers or income versus expenses, et cetera, on a daily or even weekly basis can get very tedious. I'm not really a fan of that unless you're a super cash flow type business. But getting into monthly and quarterly measurements, setting deadlines, and going back to that calendar of when you know that things will be high and low, and making your cash flow expectations and manpower expectations, et cetera, allows you to work backwards and set deadlines for, if we're going to survive this period, we have to have this in place by this date. So now we went from a raw idea of what could happen this year to starting to set us some deadlines and creating some structure around what we're trying to do. Now we can start measuring. Because, of course, measurement
is king.
That's right. Another thing people want to avoid is in the strategic planning process is, well, if we create too much measurement, then the boss knows if we're failing. We all get fired. Well, yes, but if no one knows if you're succeeding or failing,
you're going to get fired.
Then you're going to get fired, or you're all getting fired when the company goes bankrupt.
Exactly.
Because you haven't done things correctly. Right? So bake in your measurements. Start in the strategic planning process. Now we have a calendar, we have deadlines, we have to start measuring. You can't say we need to hit X by this date in order to survive the slow period if you aren't measuring how much is coming in and how much expenses you have, how much profitability you have in order to make X at that period. So deadlines don't work without measurements. So that's the next piece.
Those measurements, let me just throw this in because I think it's really important. We tend to think in terms of financial indicators and measurement. Well, we're in communications, it's a non-financial indicator. So you got to bake in some fairly significant measurement to figure out that piece of it too. So it's not just financial, but non-financial indicators.
That's a lot further down the process.
Exactly.
We're still way up at the 30,000 foot view of the process here in our first draft of our strategic plan.
I just didn't want to forget that.
No, it's true. And you ultimately get in there, and some of our other podcast episodes have much more detail than we're going to get into today on that. Another thing that seems like an oxymoron, but you should be doing at the same time and balancing how much effort you give back and forth, is short-term planning and long-term planning. Like I said, there's 5-year, there's 2-year, there's 1 year, there's quarterly, etc. All these things have to happen at the same time. So you need to understand what's happening in this month and this quarter, but you also understand how that affects the year, the 2-year period, and the company as a whole. You can't get too panicked, like I said earlier, about daily or weekly sales. A dip in a weekly sales, unless you're super, super cash flow intensive, is not anything to be panicked over. But you also can't let it go week after week after week, and now you're into a month or halfway through a quarter, and you haven't addressed issues. So it's very immediate. It's paying attention without panicking or overreacting. But at some point, you have to understand that your short term becomes longer term. And it goes back to, like you said, you can't wait to the end of the year and then go measure and go, oh, we failed. So think long term for the year, but think quarterly, think monthly, think short term and long term. Balance those things out. Don't overreact to very temporary setbacks or things that don't go as planned, and then don't assume everything is moving well and wait to the end of the year.
Well, your measurement's going to catch the trend, and that's really
Yes.
what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Don't knee jerk to one particular, or maybe even a couple of different perturbations in the process. Watch those trends, and when the trend comes, now you've got to take some action, right?
And the trend is a perfect indicator of how much structure that you've created, and then how much creativity comes from that. And this is something I say, and it makes people's heads explode. Creative people hate it, and really analytical people hate it too. Structure creates freedom.
Yeah.
Now,
Tell us more about
let me
that.
explain that, and that's another oxymoron.
Right.
You got to balance out, right? So if you go back to the idea of structured approach to communication, specifically marketing, advertising, your public relations, your external communication, you've got the things that you know you're doing on a regular basis: your brand communication, your emphasis when your high sales periods, your holiday, all of the things that go into. You can plot out on that calendar that we've already talked about.
Right.
That's structure. Now you have the in-between, the weaves in and out, the week where nothing's really happening, or some opportunities for us to maybe speed things up in slow times, where we have the creativity and adaptability to do what's necessary in that small time period.
Right.
That's where you get creative. That's where you get flexible without taking away or getting outside of the structure of the brand.
Right.
If your brand is very serious and very straightforward, you can't go crazy and do a bunch of silly stuff and have fun in your in-between periods.
Right.
It still has to stay on brand, but it doesn't have to be the exact same elevator speech that you consistently use in your brand communication.
Right, okay.
And so when you balance those things out with a structure of expected, delivered communication where people know what your brand is, what your value is, why they do business with you, right? They know who you are, what you do, along with seasonal approaches, along with short-term, along with some more human and organic approaches.
Thank you.
That's like, here's what's happening now, whether it's with our employees in a specific location, where maybe one of these silly days, these like National Hot Dog Day, and National Kiss Your Mom Day, and National Call Your Best Friend Day, all
There's
these things,
all kinds
right?
of nationals.
Those are great ways to have a little bit of fun in a very small confine that can't possibly kill your brand or the structure.
Right.
So the structure is there. It's going to happen on the regular basis. It's regular communication. It's easy to plan out almost a whole year in advance as to, we're always going to communicate these things because it's our brand message. But then it allows you now to go back in and react to audiences, watch those trends.
Right.
Trends are up, you write them. Trends are down, you got to make changes. You got to adapt, right?
Adapt.
That adaptability, that creativity comes from the fact that the structure pieces will support and follow that up.
Right.
And you can take small losses. You can have a week or 2 week or a month where you do a creative push for back to school or Mother's Day, right? And if it just doesn't catch, if it kind of fails, now if it doesn't go catastrophic, you're not on 10 o'clock news saying you guys have killed someone. But if
or you ran out of chicken.
We did it and it didn't work. Yeah, all your chicken sandwiches never showed up. But we tried something and it didn't work. It's fine because the structured pieces have kept you maintaining.
Yeah.
And so your message is out there still. People know what your brand is, what you're all about, why they do business with you.
Yeah.
So that structure creates the ability to be creative in the in-betweens.
Sweet.
So that's a whole lot, Pritch, but at the end of the day, the idea I want to communicate is balance. Long-term, short-term, structured and creative. Creating a experiment or adaptation, following trends versus being consistent in your delivery and sticking with your brand core message. All these things are kind of counter of each other, so you have to balance them out.
Right.
Really strong, well-established brands are a whole lot more on the brand-centric side and a little bit less on the fly creativity because the brand is working for them. Young brands, startups, people who need to make a change. If your brand has been this, but you're moving to this because of technology, because of competition, whatever it is, then you are a lot less brand-centric and you're a lot more small, trending adaptability, trying to find the thing that works for you so that you can move that message because you have audience attention. So it's a balance. Everything's a balance. You have to look long-term, but you got to act short-term. And your short-term informs your long-term, and your long-term goals gives you guidance for your. So see how this all goes together, right?
Absolutely.
And it sounds like if I just said long and short, you would say that doesn't make sense. Go long, go short. Be structured, be creative. Be flexible, but stay within the system that you have put together. the end of the day, you have to have a strategic plan. That strategic plan starts with the rawest, roughest notes like this draft, right? Who you are, what you do, get the calendar out.
Starts with a calendar.
It all starts there, and then ultimately you can adapt and change as the process happens.
And let's not forget about measurement.
Measurement has to
you
be part
hit
of
that
it.
hard.
I did, and it's in our previous episodes too. So our key takeaways: balance.
Yep.
Balance is the key to success. Just start. Every
start.
great plan starts with a crap draft.
Right.
Get it over with.
Right.
Get started.
Right.
And if there's someone on your team or the process or the boss or the owner who looks at a very raw draft that you know is going to go through 10 more versions and they get upset about it or they act like you don't know what you're doing or you're maybe not the person for the job, then you probably aren't because they're not the person you want to work for. Everything starts with a rough draft.
Everything
and anyone
starts.
who's worth their salt in business understands.
Yeah.
You start with a rough draft, refine it, move forward, etc. So just start. No plan is sacred.
Right.
You craft the plan. You put everything into it. You put as much detail as possible. And then there will be times stuff won't work.
Right.
Stuff will work better than expected. Stuff will not work as expected.
Right.
You'll have to adapt. Trends will happen. Things will change in the market. Stick with the plan as much as possible, but it's not sacred. You can change it if the audience and the market forces you to do so. Don't change it willy-nilly or because the CEO got an idea.
Right.
Or even worse, the CEO's best friend's cat, come up with something. But when the market changes, when your audience demands that you change, make those adaptations and bring the plan with you. Don't be held back by the plan, which is also why you write a plan and don't worry about it holding you back because you understand it will be adaptable.
There you go.
And if anyone thinks you're going to write a plan, put it down on paper, hand it to the marketing team, hand it to the sales team, hand it to everyone in operations, hand it to the CEO, and they're going to follow it like a Bible down to this must be done today and it has to be done like this. Come on, you're kidding yourself.
Well, it's not a very strategic plan that way.
No, it's not. It's a terrible way of approaching plans.
Yeah.
So don't write a plan that way, and then don't feel like you're trapped by the plan.
Exactly.
Structure creates freedom.
Right.
That's my controversial way of telling people structure creates freedom. Create as much structure as possible to free you up to do the creative and adaptive, flexible things. If those things become the most successful item, the structure will allow you to follow that.
Right.
And the things that fail will be very small failures, and you can adapt, learn from it, and move on without crippling the company.
Yeah, bam.
The more balance you can have in your approach without panicking on short term and overthinking long term, you'll end up right where you need to be.
Bam. Great words of wisdom, sir.
That is another episode of the Neo Marketing Podcast, the beginning of the end of 2019. You better have your 2020 plan together. If not, stop what you're doing right now. Start that rough draft.
Pull a calendar out.
Work through it. Get a calendar out. Get it done. Get 2020 written down and planned out today. Good luck.
Ciao.